This is part 4 of my inventory tutorial. In this part we'll be focusing on how we can actually take the items from our inventory and drop them on the ground so that we can pick them up later. As you've seen in the other parts of this tutorial, whenever we clicked outside the inventory with an item, well, then we will just delete it from the inventory. But in this part we'll look at how we can take these items and drop them instead of deleting them. So for example, if I take these 2 health potions and click outside my inventory, these 2 potions will spawn in a radius around my player randomly on random side. The tutorial focuses on taking the items and dropping them on the ground, but it doesn't focus on the animation of dropping them nicely on the ground and changing the model so it looks like a health potion or anything on the ground. You can do that by yourself, but we will look at the mechanics of how we can actually take the items and drop them. And as you can see here, I changed the color of these items, so whenever I drop them, the red ones, they are health potions, and the blue ones are mana potions, and the green ones are the weapons. So, and I can also pick them up again here. If you notice here, I can go in and pick all of them up here again, and when I pick them up, they go back into my inventory. So this is what we are gonna do in this tutorial, so let's get started. Okay, so let's get started dropping some items. It actually doesn't take a lot of code and a lot of work to make this function, because we already made a lot of the groundwork when we basically made the whole inventory. So we just need to add a little to it so that we can drop our items. So first of all, before we drop our items, we should create a prototype or a prefab that we can use for dropping all these items. So whenever we drop, for example, a stack of mana potions, well, then we need some kind of object to drop on the floor, and we need to set all the properties of this object, the health and everything, or what kind of item we just dropped. So the easiest way to do this is just take one of your items here on the screen, for example your mana potion or something, and then just duplicate it, and then you can click on it in new hierarchy here, and then you can just rename it to drop item, like that or something. And then you just take that drop item and pull it into your prefab folder, and just delete the drop item from your scene. Actually, before we delete it, I would like to make it a little smaller so that it's not as big as the other items here. So you can just take and scale it down, yeah, just like this or something. So just select the rect tool here, select your drop item, hold shift down, and then just scale it by dragging the edges of it. When done that, then just recreate the prefab by dragging the drop item onto it. So now we have some small items we can drop on the ground. Normally, I guess if you had a game with some different kind of items, some different 3D models or sprites or something, well, then you would just create the sprite or the 3D model and then switch the model out according to the item you just dropped from your inventory. So when you've done that, you can delete the drop item from your hierarchy. So next we need to go into our script, and we need to open our inventory script. And in the inventory script, we need to figure out where we actually need to drop our items from. But before we actually do that, I would like to make a new public game object here. So in the fields of your inventory here, you're gonna write public game object, and this is gonna be your drop item. So this is the prototype or reference to that item we just made before as a prefab, and this is the item that we're going to use to drop on the ground, or make a copy of it and drop it on the ground every time we want to delete an item. So we actually need to drop our item or make the code for dropping an item 2 places, because we are handling our removal of our items 2 different ways. We handle it one way if we have the whole stack and we drop it outside the inventory, and we handle it another way if we split the stack and drop it outside the inventory. And that's because earlier when we wanted to delete stuff or we wanted to drag stuff around, we picked up, if we pick up a whole stack of items, we do it one way, and if we pick up a split stack of items, we do it another way. And we have the code here inside our update function. Here is if we click on the first mouse button. Here we have the code for if we pick up the whole inventory, the whole the whole amount of slots, like the whole stack of items. And down here under here see if we can find it here. We have the code for if we picked up a split stack of items. That's what we do here. So up here is our whole stack of items, and down here is our split stack of items. So we might as well just handle the whole stack of items first. It's the same code both places, so it's not that hard to copy and paste it after we have written it once. So first of all, we want to make sure that we get all the items we just picked up. So here we picked up all the items, so we need to make a for each loop for each item in our from.items. So what this for each loop does is that whenever we pick up a stack of items, let's say if I pick up this stack of items here, well then this part, the grayed out part or the dark part, is our from slot. And that's the items we want to drop on the ground. Right now I'm not carrying any specific items around. I just want to take the items I just picked up here, our from slot, and I want to drop them onto the ground when I click out here instead of deleting them. So this is basically what we're going to do here. So for each item in that from slot in our inventory, we're going to calculate a random angle, or not a random angle, a random point of 360 degrees, because I want to drop my items randomly around the player. Maybe in your game you want to drop the items in front of the player at all times, or to the left of the player, or whatever. But in this example I'm just going to pick a random angle around me, so from 0 to 360 degrees. So the angle is going to get calculated like this, equals Unity engine dot random dot range from 0.0 to math f dot pi multiplied by 2. So this gives me a random number, a random angle from 0 degrees to 360 degrees. This is basically what this function here does, or this line of code does. I'm not going to go into great details about it, because this is not what the inventory, the tutorial is about. It's basically just about getting the items dropped. This is just something extra, and you might not even want to use it this way in your game. You might want to change it so that you can throw your items further or something whenever you drop your items. Then we need to create a vector for placing the item somewhere around our player, so we don't place it on top of the player. So first of all, I'm going to create a vector with the length of 1. So I'm going to say vector3. It's called v equals new vector3, and it's going to be math sinus, and that's going to use the angle. And then I want the y, that's just going to be 0. I don't want it to drop anything from the top. And then I'm going to use the c is just going to be math dot cosinus, and that's also going to take the angle. Okay, so what I just did here in this line of code is basically to calculate a vector with a length of 1, so in the correct direction. So I know if I picked 10 degrees in the circle of 360 degrees, and my random number ended on 10, well then I need a vector going that direction, so I can drop the item in that direction around the player. And now I need to calculate the length of the item to be placed away from the player. How far away do I need it from the player? And that's basically just taking this one and multiply by any number, for example 30. This will drop the item 30 units away from the player. So that's it so far. This is the calculation for dropping it randomly around the player. The next thing I need to do is to instantiate my drop game object, and I can do that by saying instantiate, not instance but instantiate. Okay, I can't hit my keyboard because it's game object dot instantiate. There we go. And then I'm gonna say drop item, and I also need a reference to my player actually, as I can see, because the position I want to drop it from is the player's position minus this vector here I just calculated. So I need to somehow get a hold of the player's position, and right now I don't have that inside my inventory. The player has a reference to the inventory, but the inventory doesn't have a reference to the player. So I'm just gonna create a new game object here called public, or actually I'm just gonna make private static game object player ref. And down here in my start function, I'm going to say player ref equals game object dot find player. So the reason that I'm writing player here is because outside in my Unity game, my player object has the name player. If your player is called something else, of course you need to write something else there. So if we go down here, I want to instantiate my drop item on the player ref dot transform dot position minus v, because we just calculated where when I place this item around the player. And then it wants a rotation, and we don't want to rotate our item, and to give it a rotation that isn't changed from what it has as standard, is just to say quaternion dot identity. There we go. So this should basically work when I pick up a whole item, a stack of items, and place them outside the inventory. It should basically drop them outside now. Drop it on the floor next to me. And after that I clear my slot. And it's very important that you don't clear your slot before you try to place them, because here we are using the from slot to calculate what items we need to place on the ground. And if we clear it before, well, then we don't have any items to place. So let's jump into Unity and give this a try and see if it works. See, I have this is my whole stack, and I place them out here. Oh, sorry, of course I need to make a reference. Let's see if we click on our inventory, if I could find it inside the canvas. Then I also need to say, yeah, here we have the drop item here, and now I get an unassigned reference because I forgot to assign it. So you need to go to your inventory, canvas, and then inventory, and then find the drop item, go to prefabs, take the inventory, not the inventory, the drop item prefab here, and drag it onto this position here. So now you have a reference to the drop item, so you can instantiate it. So let's give it a go again. I'm gonna pick up a couple of items, take them out, and place them. As you can see, I just placed 2 items on the ground here next to me, and these are the 2 mana potions I just took out of my inventory. And right now I can't really pick them up or something because they're still there on the ground right now. I'm not removing them, so I would be able to keep picking these up. But we need to fix that later. So now we can actually drop some items when we have a whole stack. As you can see, if I pick up some more items here, see if I can do this before it's over, and I take 2 of them out and do like this, drop them on the ground. We are not handling a split stack, so they're not going to be placed on the ground anywhere here. So what we have to do to be able to handle the split part of the stack is that we need to use the exact same code as we just did, but we need to use it underneath in the next if statement. So basically all the functionality we just wrote here, we need to copy it. So select it and press Ctrl C or something, and down here, well, here we need to do the exact same thing, but instead of saying from.items, well, we have to say moving slot.items. And the reason that we're using moving slot is because whenever we split an item or a stack of items, well, then we don't use the from stack to figure out what we need to place. If you remember from the other tutorial, we were using the moving slot. So we had if we split our stack, we took 3 items off that stack and we placed them in the moving slot. So we had something to move them around in before we placed it somewhere else in the inventory or outside the inventory. And that's why we are looking through the moving slots items and not the from items, because the from slot is not reliable to use in this situation. So we're using moving slot. So that's basically what you need to do here. So right now we should actually be able to go into our game and pick up a couple of items. And if I take 2 of these off and place them here, they will be dropped on the ground. As you can see here, I have 2 health mana potions on the ground now. So let's jump back into our script. So the next thing we need to do is to create a reference to that item we just dropped on the ground, because we need to set all the correct parameters for it, so that if we drop a mana potion, we need to make sure that it's a mana potion that we just dropped on the ground. Because right now, if we drop anything, let's say we pick up some health potions and we drop them on the ground, well, they are still mana potions. If I would pick these up, you'll see that it actually is mana potions here that I pick up, because the prefab we're using is a type of mana potion. So we need to make sure that whenever we drop an item, well, then we make sure that that item we drop is the correct, has the correct parameters or the correct stats. So we drop a health potion, we should be able to pick up a health potion, of course. So to do that, we need to make a reference called GameObject and called temporary drop or something. And this item here is going to be the item that we drop on the ground. Right now it's complaining here because it returns a Unity object, and we need to return it as a game object. So just cast it as a game object by writing game object here in parentheses. So now we have a reference to the actual object, and we need to set all the values of this object, and the easiest way to do this is basically by going to the item class and making a function in there that can set all the stats of this item class. We could also go through some reflections and everything and take the items stats right away out here, but I think it's easier and better understandable for you guys if I jump into my inventory script here, my item script, and then I just set all these functions here, all these properties. So if we jump down in the bottom here of our script and create a new function called public void, what should we say, set stats. So basically what this should do is that it needs to say, when we create the dropped item, we need to take another item and copy all the stats from that item into that item we drop on the ground. So whenever we drop the item on the ground, we take all the stats from the item in the inventory, let's say a mana potion, and we put them into the item that we're dropping on the ground, so that whenever we pick that item up, we get the correct item back in our inventory. So we need to say that we need an item here called, should call it item just. And in here we need to set all the stats for this. So basically we need to write every single item stat we have. And if we look up here in the top here, we have type, quality, sprite, type, sprite highlighted, max size, strength, intellect, agility, stamina, and so on. And we need to add all these down here. So we need to say this, the type equals item.type, for example. And this does quality equals item.quality. This dot sprite neutral equals item.sprite neutral. This dot sprite highlighted, and so forth, equals item.sprite highlighted. And what else? We need this dot max size equals item.max size. This dot strength equals item.strength. This dot intellect equals item.intellect. This dot agility equals item.agility. This is kinda annoying to write, but you have to do it. What's the next one? Stamina or something? Yeah, equals item.stamina. What else do we have? We have an item name. And this the description equals item.description. I think that's the last one. So the reason that I write this is to make sure that I access the fields up here in the same item. I could also write it without this, but I always use this keyword to make it easier readable. So these are all the stats that you actually need to write in. So one more thing, we would like our items to have the correct color whenever we drop them on the ground, or this is the part where you would actually change the model or the sprite. If you had a game with actual graphics instead of this mock-up game that I'm using, well, then you would also like to set the correct sprite for the item you just dropped on the ground. Let's say a mana potion, for example. Well, then you would like those items on the ground to look like some kind of potion, for example. So we need to make a switch here, and we need to switch on the item type, and here we are making all these different switch cases here. So if it's a mana potion, for example, we want to say get component render, I think it's called. There we go. Dot material dot color equals color dot blue, for example. So now we are sure that whenever we drop a mana potion, it's a blue mana potion, so it's blue box. Here instead you would just change the model or the sprite to a mana potion, for example, on the ground. But this is just a very simple version of it. Red, and what should make this green? So our weapons are green, our mana health potions are red, and our mana potions are blue. And we don't need a default case. So now we have set up everything for adding stats to our item we just dropped. Because if we look here, let's run our game, pick up one item and drop it. See if we can find it. It's right there. There we go. We have a dropped item here. You'll see that it has a max size of 5 and it has no stats or anything, and it's just set as a mana potion as standard. And this is what we need to set from our script. So we need to set all these stats here. I think the range is actually a little big for dropping. So if we go back to the inventory, I'm gonna set this to 25. Okay, so now we have the access to the item. Well, then we also need to set the stats. So we need to write one more line of code underneath here by saying temp drop dot get component to get the item from it. Item. So what we're doing here is that we are actually going in our script. We are going to the item in our inventory, let's say mana, and we're getting this component here, the item on it, so that we can actually access all these functions here, all these properties here on the script. This is what we're doing right now in that line of code here. So we get component item, and when we've done that, then we need to say set stats, that's what I call it. And what item do we need to get the stats from? Well, we need to get the stats from the item we just looked at in our for each loop. And that's just item. So now we are taking the item we are dropping, temporary drop here, the item we're dropping on the ground. We are setting the stats equal to the item that we just looked at, we took from our inventory. So we take an item from the inventory, copy the stats to our item and drop it on the ground. And we need to do the exact same thing up here. So basically these two lines of code here, copy them, then we need to paste them up here and change this to 25 as well. Because this part here is for dropping a whole stack, this part down here is for dropping a split stack. So let's save, jump back into Unity. Let's see if everything works. I'm gonna pick up some different items here. Let's drop a sword here. Drop a sword, I get a green kind of item dropped. If I drop the a health potion, you get a red item somewhere there. It's just placed randomly, so that's why it drops away far away. So if I take the 2 mana potions, I get 2 mana potions somewhere on the ground as here. So now I have 2 blue mana potions and a health potion and a weapon. As you can see, if I go into the weapon, I pick up the weapon, I also hit the 2 mana potions, of course. So now we can pick them up and everything, but we also want to be able to collide with them so that they disappear. So we pick up the items, so we can't keep picking up the same items over and over. That's not very good for our game if we can keep picking the same items up. So we need to go back into our script and then go to the item, and I would like to actually, I think it's the player that actually handles collision. Yes, here we have it on trigger enter. So go into your collision script or in your player script, and then we need to add a new function in here. Right now it's on trigger enter, and trigger is when 2 objects are triggered and they can go into each other. But right now I actually don't want these dropped items to be triggered, because I want them to drop and land on the ground. Because right now, if I want them to drop, let's say that every time I drop an item, I want it to spawn in the air and fall towards the ground. To do that, I need to add a rigid body. So here I added a rigid body, and the rigid body can add gravity to our objects. So right now I added gravity to it, so whenever I pick up my items, they will spawn in the air, for example, and they will start falling. Take my health potion, it spawns, and then you'll see it falls through the ground here, because they are triggers, and I don't want them to be triggers. So I need to uncheck on the inside my prefab, on the prefab here, I need to uncheck the is trigger box here. So when I've unchecked that, well, then you'll see that I can pick up these items and drop them, and they'll fall and land on the ground instead of just falling and then just falling through the ground. As you can see, they spawn and land on the ground. Looks a little better. So when you've done that, we need to handle the collision differently, because might as well have showed you this before. When I do like this and not triggers, well, I'm not going to pick them up when I run into them. As you see, I just bounce off them right now because they're not triggers. So I need to write a new function in here. Instead of on trigger, I need to write on collision, because on trigger only works on trigger colliders, funny enough, according to the name. So I need to make a new function called private void on collision enter, and instead of taking a collider, it takes a collision, and it's called collision. And in here I almost need the same code. I can do this. So other the tag is not existing, I have collision dot game object dot tag. If it's an item, well, then I want to say inventory dot add collision dot game object item. So the reason I write collision here is because I call this parameter collision, just as I did up here. Whenever I collide with some other item, the item I collide with is gonna reference, I'm gonna reference it to other. So here, whenever I collide with an other object here, I'm gonna reference that object I just collide with as collision. So I can actually access that object I just hit, that object I want to pick up by collision. So this is the object I want to pick up. When I'm done with that, when I picked it up, I need to destroy it. Collision dot game object. So now I pick up the item and put it into the inventory. So this part adds it to the inventory, and this line of code destroys it, so it disappears from our game. So let's go back into our game here, and let's pick up some items. Pick up 3 mana potions. I drop them on the ground, and as you can see, I can pick up my mana potions again. Now I have them in my inventory, and I can do the same for all other kinds of items. So now my inventory is empty, and I can pick everything up again, just as I did before. So that's basically it for this inventory tutorial. Thank you very much for watching as usual, and if you haven't done it already, please support me by downloading the project from the link in the description. If you already did it, as usual, just re-download it and you'll get this part as well in that file you'll be downloading. Thanks for all the suggestions and everything, and I'll keep making tutorials to this inventory series here, and I'll do my best to put out some more parts faster than I just did this time. If you have any questions, more requests, suggestions and everything, feel free to leave them in the comment. It's so awesome that you keep putting in suggestions, so I have something to work with when I make all these tutorials. If you have any problems cooperating or merging these tutorials into your own private projects, well, then I have added a new feature to my YouTube channel. If you click in the description, you can see that I have a Fiverr account, and in that account you can actually go in and add your own project and buy me to help you figure out how to work all these things out in your private project. And if you do that, well, then I'll make a personal video for you that explains what exactly you need to do to make this work and what I did to make it work, and of course I'll fix it for you, and then you can look at that video and see what I did to fix it. You're of course always welcome just to ask questions in the comments, and of course I'll answer them. That's basically it. Thank you very much for watching.